Hi, and welcome to the second EHHS research webinar. Today we're going to be talking about trends in qualitative research, and I'm going to start first by introducing our panelists. Tricia?
Hi, my name is Tricia Neese. This is my 12th year here at Kent State. 90% of what I teach is qualitative research, which I've really grown to enjoy a lot, but my background is in anthropology of education, which is in a subfield of the sociocultural foundations of education and also of cultural anthropology. So that was my link to qualitative methodology, was through anthropology.
Stephen, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Stephen Brown. This fall I will be beginning my 50th year at Kent State University.
Wow.
Came in 1967. My training was originally in journalism at the University of Missouri, undergraduate, and also a master's degree. Then I transferred over to political science for another master's and my PhD. And my first position was at Kent State University. I retired formally in 2011 and moved over into the Graduate School of Education. I'm in the program of evaluation and measurement. I've spent my entire career, and I'm still involved in promoting the philosophy and methodology of Q methodology, mainly at the graduate level, and I'll have more to say about that later.
And my name is Cassie Storley. I'm an assistant professor in counselor education and supervision. I am the baby, I think, of the bunch. I'm finishing my third year here. But I think one of the things that has been most exciting about doing qualitative research for me is really having the opportunity to illuminate some of the voices that are most often not heard. And so for me, qualitative research has been a natural segue to some of the research that I like to publish, and it helps me kind of look at this research to practice, that you can do interventions and really highlight those, and they can be very meaningful to the population that you work with.
Excellent. So we're going to start by just talking a little bit about your backgrounds. So within this very kind of broadly defined field, can you just tell us a little bit about the types of research that you do? And Tricia, you said you started with anthropology, so maybe you could start that conversation and just explain a little bit more about your background and then what you're currently doing as well.
Sure. As I mentioned, anthropology in education it comes from cultural anthropology, and the primary approach to qualitative research, or to research in general, is ethnography. So my background is almost entirely ethnographic in terms of the work that I was educated, trained to do. And so since I've been here at Kent State, though, I've had to become a bit more of a generalist in order to teach the courses that I teach. But my first love is really ethnography. And so what is ethnography? Really, it's the study of cultural practices through long-term participant observation. And so that's really what distinguishes it from other approaches to qualitative research, many of which are more focused on interviews, for example. But ethnographers spend months, even years, in a research site and learn about culture through experiencing culture. And that's the kind of work that I was trained to do, and a lot of my prior research was ethnographic in schools primarily, and also in educator networks. More recently, though, I have been working on a case study. It's not ethnographic. I didn't do long-term participant observation, but the case study focused on looking at the history of a school reform movement. So there, since we needed to have a historical lens, we collected oral histories. We did a lot of ethnographic interviewing, even though our observations were limited in time and in scope. And then we collected lots and lots of reform documents and curriculum and things like that. So those are the two kinds of research I've had the most experience with, ethnography and qualitative case study.
And Cassie or Stevens, you want to give a little bit of background information about yourself and the work that you're doing?
Sure. Well, as I've already said, I was trained primarily in political science, more specifically in the field of subfield of political psychology. My focus has been on Q methodology, which broadly has to do with establishing the foundations for a science of subjectivity. And subjectivity pervades everything that we do. And so my publications have not been substantively in a particular area. So my publications have included contributions to group dynamics, to public opinion research, to personality and political psychology, to decision-making and strategic planning, to conflict resolution, to ethics and meta-ethics, to political theory, public administration, literature and poetry, musical preferences, single case studies, cultural studies, empowerment and marginalization, conservation biology, fatigue in young cancer patients, children of divorce, education and counseling, and security and intelligence studies, and perhaps a few others that I didn't list. So in all of these have employed Q methodology, which has its statistical side, involves correlation and factor analysis, but it has been embraced by some people in qualitative methods. Some people call it a qualitative method. Others say it's a mixed method because it involves statistical as well as qualitative aspects. And so the dust has not settled on that particular issue as to where it fits best. But it certainly has compatibilities with qualitative methods.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Q methodology, and then also why people see it as a qualitative research design?
Sure. Q methodology has its technical side, and that is perhaps better, I'm sure it's better known than its a more philosophical and conceptual side, which has to do with, as I say, with the basis for the scientific study of subjectivity. The Q-sort technique, which is well known in psychology and is increasingly known in a wide variety of other fields, and really applies to everything under the sun, because, as I say, you find subjectivity in physics, you find subjectivity in mathematics, subjectivity is everywhere. In ethnographic work, it's everywhere. The technique itself, the Q-sort technique, involves getting a set of stimuli, usually statements of opinion that people have made, for example, about Barack Obama, let's say, whether they like him and that he's too uppity, or that he's one of the best presidents we've had. All of these are subjective statements, what we refer to as a concourse of subjective communicability. And from that we gather a sample of somewhere, let's say, between 30 and 50 statements from the concourse to be our sample. And we ask people then to represent their own point of view by ranking these from those that they most agree with to those that they most disagree with. And all of that is subjective. There's no right way to respond to any one of those statements. People may agree with it, and it's usually along a scale from, let's say, +5 to -5, from most agree to most disagree. Those rankings can then be computer analyzed, and we end up with types of people. Some people have ranked statements one way, and they have a particular take on Barack Obama. Other people have ranked it another way. And so the groupings that we get, which technically are referred to as factors from factor analysis, represent different subjective orientations. And it's that, I think, that has to do with differences in meaning, differences in understanding, different perspectives that I think people in qualitative methods find appealing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And Cassie, do you want to tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. My research centers in on career development of marginalized populations in particular. So looking at Latino populations and also individuals with disabilities. So I tend to explore the academic risk or mental health disparities among Latino youth in schools as a way to decrease some of those social and cultural barriers that happen within career development. So as I had mentioned before, for me, looking at how qualitative research can help support a research to practice model, understanding what kinds of experiences Latino youth are dealing with, and looking at equity and access are very important to me from a topic perspective, and being able to shine the light on that to help others learn from that and to grow. So as a Latina as well, you know, my research is my me search. So looking at issues of social justice and career development also helps kind of lend into what we're doing as leaders in counselor and counselor education, looking at leadership development, multicultural leadership development, and how those developmental processes take place within programs or individually. And so for me, I think having that opportunity to look at phenomenology, having the opportunity to look at grounded theory are very important and respected ways to do that within my field so far. And so, and I think applying a specific framework is also very important when we're talking about counseling and counselor education. So ecological theories such as Bronfenbrenner, or looking at social construction or constructivism, and kind of how reality becomes built is very important in our field as well.
Thank you. And as you're talking, you know, I'm hearing interesting overlaps, that idea of how reality is built within also people's subjectivity and where those things happen. So again, realizing that this is a very broad topic, who do you think are the most influential researchers in qualitative research broadly, or in your very specific, either in ethnography or Q methodology? But who would you say are some of the more influential researchers in the field?
Well, I would say just looking generally at qualitative research, at least those of us in education, I think, come across Norm Denzin's name a lot, Ivana Lincoln, Egon Guba. Those three are pretty prominent qualitative researchers in education and beyond, I think, in the field more broadly. Within ethnography, I was thinking about this, and it's really hard to choose, but I would say a couple of the people who really transformed ethnography historically, I would name Clifford Geertz, who is a cultural anthropologist who's writing in the 60s through the 1980s, really, I think, brought a very strong interpretivist lens to ethnography, a lens that is still so prominent today. The other person who comes to mind is Paul Willis, who is not an anthropologist, but is a well-known critical ethnographer from cultural studies. And he, I think, more than, again, at least from an education perspective, brought critical ethnography to the foreground in a way that's still very, very prominent today. So in my field, in anthropology of education, critical ethnography is the dominant approach to research. And I think we can trace that back to some extent to Paul Willis. So those are the two names that come to mind as people who've transformed the field of ethnography.
For me, I can speak just to the grounded theory and phenomenology. Definitely, Mustakas is huge. Van Manen. I think about Sharmaz, Strauss, and Corbin. Those are some very top hitters, I would say, within those different approaches. And in particular, when I think about career development, when I think about life design, our own homegrown Dr. Mark Savickas has done much work with career development. And then also I think about the storied approach, which is from Paula Brott. Also talks about constructing and co-constructing with clients or with participants an individual story, so helping them co-author a story. And so that's, I would say, specific to career in particular.
Stephen, every time anyone brings up Q methodology, your name is mentioned. So I think you might be the leading expert, but do you have any other influential researchers?
Yes. Well, although I blush, I would say that as far as the field of Q methodology is concerned, that my name probably is at the top. It would have been William Stevenson, the inventor of it, but I studied with Stevenson. He passed away in 1989. He was a British psychologist and also a physicist with PhDs in both fields. And he influenced me greatly, as you can imagine. But there are some other individuals. My book on political subjectivity is Stevenson's was first, the study of behavior, and then political subjectivity. My book came later. It's long out of print now, and I should write another if I have in my copious free time. I will do that. But Dan Thomas and Bruce McEwen, who happen to have been students of mine, authored the Sage volume on Q methodology in that little green book series. There's been a strong British influence in Q methodology, and most recently the book by Simon Watts and Paul Stenner. Paul is at the Open University, and Simon Watts is at the University of East Anglia. And their book, Doing Q Methodological Research, also a Sage publication, would be also an important volume. James Good, who's a psychologist at the University of Durham, now emeritus professor, is important. He's written many papers on Stevenson in particular, and is writing a full-length, book-length biography of Stevenson that he's been working on for a number of years. Stephen Jeffers at the University of Birmingham is also an important figure. Q methodology has attracted scholars from a variety of fields because it applies to so many areas, all areas really, such that although there are not very many people who are important in terms of promoting Q methodology as such, there are a number of subject matter leaders. So that Sue Ramlow, for instance, who happens to be at the University of Akron and who is a physicist and a former president of our organization, has written widely about science education. She's also in the School of Education over there. James Rhodes has written on popular culture broadly. Amanda Wolff in public policy and public administration. She's at the University of Wellington in New Zealand. In education, Diane Montgomery at Oklahoma State University has written quite a number of articles, no book, on Q methodology. There's a Swedish group of educational psychologists who've written a number of things, primarily focusing on things like children of divorce and the impact of divorce on their educational activities. But there are specialists in health psychology and in nursing, in discourse theory, geography, environmentalism, educational policy. There are individuals in all of these areas who stand out, but in their specific areas, and stand out because of their applications in those specific areas. And so there's literatures, bodies of literature associated with each of those individuals.
Thank you. Yeah. You shared a tremendous amount of resources. Thank you. So thinking about that, either faculty who are interested in branching into this methodology, or doctoral students or graduate students who are entering the field, what advice would you give them about your particular field of research?
About Q methodology. Well, again, it depends on whether they plan to be a subject matter specialist or whether they become interested in developing the science of subjectivity itself. I advise students in particular to be as broad as they can, to take interest in anything and everything. I try to emphasize the importance of being able to write well and to read widely, particularly in literature. I think reading a lot in literature and poetry makes one a better makes one better at understanding human behavior, human motivation, and so forth, which Q methodology isn't limited to that by any means. But when it comes to interpreting the results of a Q methodological study, having a broad understanding of human behavior and human motivation becomes very important things, whether you're talking about careers or whether you're talking about political attitudes and policy recommendations. Knowledge of human behavior and human motivation are very important things. So,
I'd say I like Stephen's point about reading widely. I think that's great. I think what I would say in terms of new researchers who want to get involved with ethnography, I would encourage them to read a lot of ethnographies. I think as much as methodological literature is vital and really helpful, reading the end results of this work is so important, and with ethnography in particular, to see, to read a full-length, book-length ethnography, you really get to see not only what the researcher learned, but the experience of ethnography, especially in the way that ethnographies are written today. You can see the commitment and the work that the researcher put in to producing that book. I would advise someone interested in ethnography to start reading a lot of ethnographies.
I would say, I guess, looking at phenomenologies and grounded theory, I think what was most important to me in the research that I've done thus far has been the importance of recognizing that I am the human instrument in analyzing the data and making sure that I am bracketing information, that I'm doing my best to be transparent, to make sure that the data is trustworthy and credible. And with that, that takes a considerable effort in bracketing out some things that come with us as being human instruments. So knowing that we all have histories and understandings and identities, and trying to do what we can to really kind of compartmentalize that some, so that we can go into new data and new approaches and new studies with open eyes, and really trying not to have other things cloud our perceptions as we work with different participants and we work with different students. So I would never, the advice I guess I would give to newer researchers too is never underestimate the power that you have as being that human instrument, and that you are the researcher, and to really take those steps very critically and make sure to encompass them in a way that you are being rigorous with your data.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you all for participating. I know this is an incredibly busy time of year, and so we appreciate your expertise and also your time. So again, thank you for joining us, and we hope that you will check out our future webinars.